Welcome all. And my name is Cathy Andrews. I'm the Senior Librarian for Adult Services and Adult Literacy with the Salinas Public Library in Salinas, California. We've been offering some genealogy classes over the last, 9 or so months, and it's been a real pleasure to have them. And tonight's focus is on getting started. All right, so really tonight, we're taking a look whether you are someone who is just getting started with genealogy, or maybe you used to genealogy and now you're back, and you're wondering what's changed and what you might want to do next. We're going to cover some of the basics and enough to make you feel confident as you're getting started, and make sure you know about some of the most basic resources that we use. You know, family history can be fascinating or frustrating or fulfilling. It can be all three of those things at once. We'll talk a bit about what to do. I sometimes hear people say they don't know anything about their family, and that often turns out to only be a little bit true. And what kind of records can you find, and where the heck do you find them? And we'll talk about both easily accessible records. We'll talk about records that are harder to find. We'll talk about things you can find online. There are some things you can only find offline, but we'll try to give you a sense of what it is when you're doing your family history. Where is it that you can find things? Let me also mention I have a couple of small furry coworkers with me that I'll be bribing with treats occasionally. So if you hear the occasional yap, it's just the dogs. Now, I want to tell you a little bit of a story. I am lucky because in my family, there's been folks who have done a lot of genealogy for the family over the years. And I have a second great grandfather whose name was Nathan Pratt Merrill. And I'm originally from Michigan. I spent most of my life there before moving to California about 14 or so years ago. And a lot of my relatives came through from the New England states, through New York, and into Michigan. And I happened to find, we knew about Nathan, but I happened to find a plat map. Plat maps are something that are very common, especially in farm country. They were put out, a lot of them, in the 1870s, 1880s, up until 1940s. You can even find some more recent than that. And basically the map shows a 6 mile by 6 mile grid of a township, typically, and then it's divided up into who owns that land. It's kind of fun when you're looking at maps and think, in fact, I may do a program on maps and how to use them. I actually have some background as a forester before doing library stuff, and understanding maps can make a big difference. And so I looked around on the plat map, and sure enough, there was Nathan Merrill and his 80 acres. And I kept looking. I have a systematic way I look through these. They might look a little crazy, but they're actually really easy to look through if you know a couple of tricks. And I found the other side of the family, Russell Andrews. And then looking a little further, I found Nathan's father, Jeremiah Cathy Merrill. And we knew about Jeremiah. I mean, one of the reasons this is so interesting to me is because we were able to push a family line back a little bit. And there's some stories that I think are going to be worth exploring. Jeremiah Cathy Merrill, who was Nathan's father, my third great grandfather, born originally in Pittsfield, Mass, and then ended up in Burns Township in Michigan. This is a copy of a land grant that he got from 1830. His mother, Lydia Cathy, my fourth great grandmother, was born in Connecticut and actually ended up in Michigan, in Ypsilanti, which is near Ann Arbor well, she died in 1838. She got to Michigan a bit before that, just a few years before that, when Michigan, in fact, was just becoming a state. And I found online, this is not the greatest version of the picture, but there's actually a memorial stone on the former burial ground in Ypsilanti that I realized when I looked at it that I probably drove by that when I used to live in Southeast Michigan. I probably drove by that place 100 times and had no idea that there was a memorial stone there. And the next layer of going back was finding her father, Jeremiah Cathy, my fifth great grandfather, who was also born in Connecticut when America was a colony, and died when America, after we came to be our own country. And he was a major in a regiment of infantry of the Massachusetts line in the Revolutionary War. And so I was very excited to find out a little bit more about him. Now, this stone is obviously not a stone from that time period. It looks a lot like the stones that veterans get today. And so I looked a little further. One of the people that I found some information about, Jeremiah, one of my very distant relatives, had an article. They had actually gone ahead and figured out roughly the area where they think Jeremiah may have been buried. And since he was a veteran, they were able to get a tombstone for him. And the Sons of the American Revolution had a ceremony that people from around the area attended. So that was kind of fun to trace back that far. Here's this guy that was born in 1731 and had a part in the American Revolution, and now I know one more layer of my family history. These are the kinds of things. Not everybody gets the same kinds of stories, but we all get stories about our family and our own history. It's really, genealogy is a way to document our family stories and our family history. And then the other thing I love about genealogy is really history gives us a way to further help understand our family and ourselves. I had some folks in my family line that were loyalists and moved to Canada. I had other folks that fought in the Revolution. It's all part of what got me to who I am today. So when you are getting ready to do your own research, if you haven't started yet, or if you made a start and felt like you maybe didn't get anywhere, the first thing to do is to start with what you know. And what that means is starting with you. You are part of your family history. So write down the details about you. Make a record for yourself. The birth date, schools you may have attended. If you're married, you might want to include that. And then take a step back to your parents. Write down what you know about them. And I know that not everybody knows about their parents. There are people who are adoptees who are doing genealogy. They may know their parents who are their adopted parents, but they don't yet know their parents who were their birth parents. But write down also all the information about your siblings if you have them. And make it their full names. If your family uses middle names, make sure that's part of it. Yes, you can record information like nicknames or how people are more commonly called, but full names, birth info, marriage info, death info. Include things like the places you and your family have lived. If you've always lived in the same town, maybe in the same house, that's fine, but get that detail down. And what do you know about where your parents grew up? Then any other details that you know, including stories about your ancestors. It doesn't matter right now whether that story is factual or whether it has changed over the years. Write down what you know. So After you've gotten down information about yourself, your siblings, your parents, then start with your 4 grandparents. This is often a way that people start to organize their genealogy, as they think of it in terms of 4 lines spreading back from their grandparents. And whatever you know, if your grandparents are still alive, then guess what? Talk to them right now. If your grandparents have already passed, then write down either what you know from your own experience or write down what you know from what other people have told you. And again, get down as much detail as you can. Keep some things in mind. If you were a year old when your grandfather died, you know what year you were born, and you know roughly how old he was. You can make an educated guess about what year he was born if you don't know it. Write down everything you know. The same with your aunts and uncles. If your parents had siblings, make sure that information gets written down. Again, places your family lived and any details about them, including stories. Sometimes stories are 2 sentences long. It's something that someone told you about a relative, a kind of food they liked, or a job they tried, or some famous thing they said that everybody quoted after that. Stories don't have to be pages and pages long. They're all the details that add to really understanding more about your relatives, who they were in the time that they may have lived through. And then really talk to your family, ask questions. Whether you're talking to them long distance, over the phone or through Zoom, whether you're talking to folks, if you're not comfortable being together with family yet because of the pandemic, you can still talk to them. Certainly at family gatherings, talk to folks, mention things you know about a relative, ask what memories they have, ask what information they know or remember about that person. And if people have differing memories, that's okay. Try to capture all the memories that people have. People often have different perspectives on the same event that might have happened, and they may have heard different stories. The person they heard stories from may have had a better memory or a worse memory. But the more details you have, then the more leads you have to do some research. Keep in mind that when you're asking questions, if you can ask open questions, which, as you probably know, are questions that can't just be answered with a yes or no. Open questions are often a really useful way to get information. Tell me about this person or this place or this event. What do you remember? What kind of foods did you have at family gatherings? In the summer when you were out of school, what did you do? What kind of work did that person do? And you can also start with right now. I have a friend who's 100.5 years old. And when the pandemic started, we talked about times she had lived through that were like this. Being a child with polio scares, having an uncle that the family loved who had died of the influenza a couple of years before she was born. There are lots of ways to get into conversations with people. If people are willing, go ahead and record it. If you've got a smartphone, you've got lots of options for recording. If they're willing to let you set up a camera or your phone and video it, that's great. Even if they're just willing for audio, that's fine. If they're not willing to be recorded, then take the best possible notes you can. Even if you're using audio or video, I encourage you to also take notes. If you get home and nothing, it didn't work for whatever reason, you don't want to have lost that opportunity. I also encourage you to go over any recordings or any note-taking that you've done as soon as you can once you're sitting down somewhere with it, and get it written out, get it typed out, make it into a Word document, write out as many things as you remember. Don't worry about formatting and proper grammar, and if you need to do some bullet points, do those. The eventual, if you're aiming for family stories as part of your family history, you'll get there. But right now, write down everything that you remember, everything that was covered in the conversation. You can go back later and do the formatting. Once you start gathering information, you're going to want to record it. There are a couple of charts that we're going to talk about today. I mean, there are numerous genealogy charts and forms that can help you. One of the most basic charts is the pedigree chart. Just like any kind of pedigree for, a winning racehorse, etc., pedigree charts start with you or the person you're researching, and then they allow you to put in that person and information, the father, the mother, the father's father, the father's mother, etc. We'll take a closer look at a pedigree chart. Another chart that can be very helpful for you, and let me just mention, when you're just starting, you might want to do these on paper and with pencil, but you can go immediately into tree building sites and get it in there digitally. So whichever way works for you is fine, but you're still going to be doing the same kind of information gathering. The other kind of a chart that's super helpful when you're getting started is what's called a family group sheet. And that's where you've got, essentially the nuclear part of an extended family. So it's a husband and wife, and then their children. Typically, when you're keeping track of genealogy, when someone marries is when you start your own family group sheet for that person. Before someone's married, or if they never marry, they may just end up on their parents' family group sheet. You typically are trying to put, there's information that you're gathering about the husband or father, the wife or mother. When you're listing the children, you're trying typically to list them in chronological order. This is another reason to use pencil if you're doing it by hand on paper. And there are a million versions of this kind of a form, and they let you have different levels of detail. Some go as far as occupations. Some want to know where the burial took place. So there are all kinds of forms. You can find the one that you like, and make good use of it. Again, whether it's a paper copy or you've got it in the computer. So what are the kind of things that we as a civilization keep track of? What are the kind of records that will help you find out more information about your family members? The most typical are birth, death, and marriage. They're often abbreviated on genealogy forms with the first initials. So B for birth, D for death, M for marriage. Think about things like military service, education, both K-12 and college education. Legal documents like wills, like deeds to land, licenses. If someone was a doctor and they needed a medical license, other kinds of things like that. The nice thing about the internet is that there are so many types of records that are now available that previously you would have had to write off to an organization or a governmental unit to ask them to make copies of, pay for the copies, include an envelope for them to send it back to you, wait for the lag time of the inquiry letter getting there, the staff to have time to look something up, the letter to get back to you, which may or may not have the information that you're hoping for. Now, there are still some records that are only available in person, but there are so many things, even compared to, say, 5 years ago, there are so many things that have been digitized at this point that you can find a terrific amount of records through the internet. The research I did that got me the Jeremiah Cathy, if I'd had to go to Connecticut or New York State to look that up, think of the expense, the time, the chance of finding what I wanted. And in a couple of hours, I could do the research, find the information, check it against other resources to make sure I thought it was trustworthy. So the internet cannot be underrated as something to help with genealogy, but not everything is available on the internet. One thing that I recommend you do is think about who is it that keeps records. You know, obviously the government keeps all sorts of records, both local, local meaning city, town, township, county, state records, federal records. Religious organizations keep records. In fact, the further back we go, when governmental organizations didn't have the capacity or did not require certain records to be kept, often it's religious organizations that were keeping those birth, marriage, and death records. Schools are another place, for example. Institutions that are part of whatever geographic region you're looking at will have some sort of records. Now, of course, the further back you go, the more likely it is that, that you're going to run into something where records may have been damaged or lost. You know, there may have been fire or flood. They may have been carried off in a revolution or destroyed in a war. So not every kind of record is available all the time. They're also, you know, the requirement to register births was not universal since this country was founded, for example. So if you're doing research in America and you're looking back pre-1850-ish, there just may not have been any kind of a birth record in a public record about your relatives. So when you begin your research, the first place, once you've done all your family research and gotten that initial set of information.
Yeah, don't do nothing. Yeah, no. Did he park there? I'm assuming he did. I pulled up so we could.
Oh my gosh. Folks, if you could go ahead, if you're not muted, please go ahead and mute. So check public records as the first part of your external research. There's some really obvious public records. One of the things that people use the most is census records, and that's a really important kind of record that has lots of layers of detail depending on what year it is. Our first American census had the most limited detail you can imagine because they were just trying to figure out how many people were in the darn country and roughly what age range were they. Were they male or female? But the further you go with census, the more information was collected. And the more periodically I do a session on making the best of the census. Birth and death records. There are birth and death records available, and they sometimes they have loads of information. Some records, some death records gather the information about the parents of the person. Other places don't. A place may gather information about the parents of the person, but the person who's reporting the death may not know the details, may not know the maiden name of the mother, may not know where they were from. So even with records that are kept, there can be gaps. Marriage records are very interesting. They're kept in a variety of ways. Some of them have more information than others. Tax records. You can find tax records going back. And sometimes you can find out things. There was a period during and just after the Civil War when the people were taxed to help pay for the war, and you can find out what the what wage earners were, what their occupation was. You know, I found out that in many places, peddlers which was a common job, there were different classes of peddlers depending on how much they made. In a given year, which was also reflected in their taxes. If you've never heard of city directories, those are going to be something that could be very useful for you. They're not everywhere, and they're not everywhere every year, but many times they list the spouse. Often if a woman is the main list and she's the widow of someone, they'll list who the husband was. There are directories that are for farmers, which used to be the most common occupation in the country. And they often listed things like how many acres the person had and what their farm was valued at. Cemetery records can be very useful. Find a Grave is an online website. And at some of the sites, you get a bare bones report. At others, the page for any particular person in that cemetery might be linked to their parents, their siblings, their spouse, their children. Sometimes people have connected obituaries to it or posted pictures of obituaries, and you can find a whole bunch of clues. Other times, it's the most bare information. They may not even know the birth date, they just know the death date. And it may be linked to nobody else, but it's still can prove useful. Think about other public records, other legal documents. Sometimes reading divorce records is super fascinating. Sometimes wills, if the person left a will, have very limited information. Other times, I ran across a will for some relatives of mine recently that listed every child, listed who the spouse was, listed their age, listed where they were living. Other wills just mention the people who are getting a bequest in them. Deeds can have information. There are all kinds of legal documents that can have interesting information. After you've harvested what you can from public records, and this may be at the same time as you're doing it with public records, but usually you want to take a look at public records, then you may go more in depth with family records. It may take you a little while to reach out to some family members, but family Bibles often have information about birth, death, and marriage. Maybe someone kept a scrapbook. There are time periods in the last couple of centuries where there were scrapbooks. Sometimes when people, I have a great aunt who I never met, but she had a signature book for people from her high school class. There were less than 20 people in her high school class. She was in a small town in Michigan. And that was fascinating to read through and see what people, some names I recognized as family members or near family members, other names were just local folks. But it was fascinating to look through that signature book because people would write a quote or they would write a sentiment to her. You may start to be able to see photo albums that people didn't realize you're interested in before. If someone has kept the funeral cards that list information about the person who's died, and sometimes will list family members, that's another source of family information. I put yearbooks in here because in some locations, a library or a historical society may have copies of local yearbooks, but if your family has yearbooks with signatures in it, with that sort of information, again, that can be really interesting. Seeing a picture of my mother at college as the president of one of the clubs, with all the club members arrayed around her was really fun to see her in her early 20s doing something she obviously was really having fun with. And then think about some records that are sort of a little less common. They're not exactly public records necessarily, but they may be publicly available. They're not exactly family records, but there are all kinds of civic organizations. And many times their membership lists are available online. You may be able to find notes from meetings, which can be really fascinating to see what mattered to people at that moment in that time period. There are fraternal organizations. There may be business groups. And you can find there's no telling if you're going to be able to find those things. And even then, if your relative is listed in them, but it can be fascinating to make that search. So there are some conventions in genealogy, and I don't mean genealogy conventions like let's all get together. I mean conventions about how things are written out. And when you consider the number of people that are doing research and the number of different sources that they're using, these conventions help make sure that we all understand what everyone is doing. One set of conventions is around names. When you record people, record them with their full name. If they have a nickname, you can list that in another location. For women, typically, if they took their husband's name at marriage, which, once you get back in research, that is what was done in many, many cultures, then you should always list them by their maiden name when you're doing searches. When you're online and doing searches, especially if you're using a site like Ancestry or Family Search, once they're linked to their husband, then if their name comes up, their married name comes up, it'll find it. But you don't want to miss out on information from their maiden name. It was a convention for a while that last names should be all caps. That was mainly when people were writing things out by hand or typing them out by hand on a family group sheet, let's say. And it was meant to make it easier to spot when you were going through by hand to look for someone. That has shifted to not using all caps for the last name. If you have been doing genealogy for a while, maybe you're coming back to it, or everything you've done so far has all caps for the last name, I wouldn't worry too much about it. Don't go back through and change things necessarily, unless as you're double checking a line or looking for new information. If you want to update it, that's great. But if you're getting started, that's no longer a convention. And then with nicknames, you do want to have a chance to record that. Or perhaps I have several relatives, both men and women, who preferred their middle name to their first name. And so, my grandma, Ruth Margaret Crow, only once she had a choice as a youth, only ever went by Margaret. But her first name is Ruth, her middle name is Margaret. So on her genealogy record, I have that recorded. I also have Margaret recorded as her preferred name. Now, when it comes to dates, one of the reasons there are conventions around dates is because we want to reduce confusion. Around the world, people have different ways of writing out dates. And so if you stick with just numbers, you can see in my example, 3/6/1935 in the US, that would be March 6th, 1935. In many places in, say, Europe, that would be June 3rd. In the military, it would be June 3rd. And so the typical way you're going to write it out is day, then month, then year. You're going to use numbers for the day and the year. And you're going to use the name. You're going to write out the month. Now, many people use the first 3 letters of the month. If you want to write the whole month out, that's fine. It's often an issue of the amount of space it takes up on a document, on a tree. For a month like June, that's 4 letters, not 3. I don't think anybody's going to quibble. But the more important thing is day, then month, then year. And the last convention I want to mention today is places. Start with the smallest entity and work outward from there. So if you're in a village, if you're in a town or a city, that's the first thing you're going to list. The next thing is going to be the county. And in most cases, especially in the US, you can just say the county's name. You don't have to also type out county or CO for county. And again, if you've been doing that, don't worry about it. But it's surprisingly faster when you're typing out places, faster seeming to not have to type out that CO or county. And then you're going to list the state. On the documents that I keep for myself, I abbreviate the states. But as you know, state abbreviations have changed over the years. So it's okay to go ahead and write it all the way out. If you're working in the US, not everybody will add USA or United States of America. They often will add it, though, for another country. And so depending on where your family's from and what kind of research you're doing, it may not be they may not have counties. They may have some other designation. They might have towns, townships, and then the state. Whatever it is, though, start with the smallest entity and work outward. Take a quick look at the chat. Yes, you can start with township if there's not a city, but if there is a city is our village, that's smaller than a township. So someone having confusion around maiden names and not including the married name, then I would suggest that you have a consistent way that you indicate what the married name is. Perhaps it's in parentheses. Perhaps you do go ahead and make it all bold. Maybe you make the maiden name with italics. There are some sites, cemetery, I'd find a grave. If the maiden name is known, it's shown in italics. But if you want to be sure you know whether if you don't know the maiden name, you don't want someone to be confused because the married name is in there. How soon can you get a copy of a will after a person dies? A lot of legal documents, your access is going to depend on how closely related you are to that person. If you are in direct family, you're more likely to have access to it sooner. But if you're not related closely to that person, like there are many places where you can't write off and get a birth certificate unless you are, a child of that person, a spouse of that person. I think siblings are often included, or it usually will stretch as far, like as a grandchild, I could get my grandparents' marriage certificate, for example. So it can vary by location. I see there's a question about religious records. Let's hang on to that. Elizabeth, with the LGBTQ population, there are some that list like marriage records, marriage licenses do today, spouse 1 and spouse 2. And you can also make your own records. But I know that there are some that are out there, and that can be found. And then maybe there's a business idea for you, coming up with actual LGBTQ friendly record keeping. We're going to spend a little bit of time. I'm going to take you online so you can see some of the resources that are available online. But I want to draw a distinction. There are some sites that are oriented to building your tree and searching records that would help you build that tree. There are other sites that are more about broad information about genealogy. They may have some information that helps you either track down where to find something, or you can learn more. But just keep in mind that there are lots of kinds of genealogy sites, but broadly speaking, if you think of it as the sites that are oriented to help you create your tree and do the research, and there are sites that are oriented to help you find places you might want to research, learn more about genealogy, have the opportunity to connect with people with the same last name, perhaps. I'm just drawing those two buckets of kinds of sites, and I want to make sure that you realize the kind of things that you may be able to find in some of those broad genealogy sites. One of the oldest and most trusted sites that I like to use as an example is what's called Cindy's List. There is a Cindy, and in fact, she's who does this whole list, and it's a really big list. She does not have a staff, and she's actually, devotes hours and hours to making it work. In this screenshot, you can see that there are different categories. They do have a mailing list. Cindy always wants to know, or you can find new links. If you find a link you think she should know about, you can do it, send the information in and she'll check it out. You can also report a broken link. With the thousands and thousands of links at this site, you know how the internet works. Links break all the time because somebody has migrated to a different server, or they might have stopped maintaining the site, etc. So, again, with categories, so you can see with the genealogy categories, they're alphabetical, and you can just scroll through. There's everything from Acadia to adoption. There's newspapers, myths, hoax, and scams about genealogy, names. There are organizations that are based around shared family names. And when you, just using that category as an example, even within the category index, funny names, general resources about names, names that are specific to a locality or an ethnic group, you can see there's a variety of subsets within just that category of names. There are related categories that, in looking in names, you might actually have been looking for one of these other categories. And if we take a look for a moment just at surnames, my last name is Andrews. It shows up in records as Andrews. It often is linked with Anders. There are some other last names that come under that. So if I wanted to, I could click on surnames under A and see if there are any organizations related to Andrews. When it comes to the other big bucket of places that are about research and about building trees, really there's a big four. And the biggest two are Ancestry.com and Family Search. Find My Past and My Heritage are two other sites. If you are starting out in genealogy, some sites cost money, some sites are free. The reason that sites that cost money is because, think about things like they need a staff who are overseeing transcriptions of documents. They need people who can make sure that the servers are functioning with the loads and loads and loads of records that are in those servers. They also may have some special services they're able to offer if you want. And so, the internet is not for free. A free example like Family Search, it's a great site. If you're not sure how much you want to do genealogy right now, or if money's an issue, then you can make really great use of Family Search. That one is directly related to the Mormon Church, which has genealogy is very important within the Mormon religion. And they have it free because they're trying to basically create a worldwide tree where everyone is linked. And so with a free option and that linked tree, when you are building your tree there, it's not your private tree. That's the trade-off you're making in order to have free access to the site. When you are making a tree at a paid site, then it's your tree. You might keep it private, you might make it public, but one of the trade-offs of paying the money is that you have complete control over your tree, over what you're searching, who you're adding to your tree. With Family Search, you know, my mom had a distant cousin who had the same first name and maiden name as her. They were born, if it wasn't the same year, it was within a year of each other. And they lived within 10 miles of each other in farm country, so a couple of towns apart. And someone had, when I first went into Family Search, someone had linked my mom to the parents of this other Barbara. And so you know, I went in and fixed that and put in the reasons why it was changed, but it's not in Family Search. My tree is not under my own control, so you're going to find things cropping up that under the paid sites you will not run into. One of the things about the paid sites is many of them have different levels, different expenses per month. You should also keep in mind that there will occasionally be specials from most of the paid sites, and you may end up doing your research through free sites, and then when the paid site is available at a discount, you might just come in for a month or 2 months to get the discount price and then end that membership having done a bunch of research. So there are lots of different ways to try to make the best use of the research sites. All right. What I'm going to do now is I am going to share my screen again, and I'm going to take you into do a quick look at Ancestry and how it works, at Family Search and how it works, and then also talk a little bit more about some of the forms that you may want to use. I have particular examples from one site that I love a lot as a free place to get forms. So, okay, so when you get to Ancestry, because I have an account here, my landing page looks a little different than it would if you're coming in and you don't have an account. But same basic idea. If you don't have an account, they'll give you an opportunity to make that account. And then if you do have an account, once you're logged in, you'll see a variety of things. In this ribbon right here at the top, you know, I'm on the home page right now. When I'm ready to look at my already constructed trees, I would click there. If I just want to hop in and do a search, then I can do that outside of, you know, like occasionally I'll run across a neighbor that keeps showing up in documents, and I'll just do a quick search on that person, see where they lived, see, you know, the guy who was a witness to my grandparents' wedding. Did he live nearby? Do I have any idea? You know, did their farms adjoin? Can I make any best guesses about why he keeps showing up? Since, as far as I know, they're not related by blood. Ancestry also has DNA tests available, and you know, you can pop in there. I am, you know, sometimes people do DNA and get real surprises, including finding out that their parents or grandparents may not be directly related to them. My family is very boring. We are exactly what we thought we were. And so, you know, it's been very interesting the way DNA works. My siblings and I have, you know, slightly different results. But mostly here in the British Isles, a big chunk in Germany, Scotland, or I mean Sweden and Norway, I'm guessing are actually probably Viking influence that came into the British Isles, because I don't have any lines as far back as I've gone, and I've been back 10 and 12 generations in some of the lines, and I don't have any strictly Swedish or strictly Norwegian relatives. my folks, like I said, followed a very predictable path from those countries at the time they came over, and landed in some communities which are also broken out, additional communities, early Connecticut and New York settlers, early New England settlers, a bunch of Nova Scotia. My dad's mom was from Nova Scotia, so a bunch of Nova Scotia stuff. So it's the DNA results were not interesting in the sense of any surprises at all. All right, let me go back to trees, and I'm going to go into my direct family tree. Now I have a brick wall, which is a relative I cannot get beyond, and it's in the Andrews family line. And Lorenzo was a pretty popular name for boys who were born in the first half of the 1800s. And in the state of Michigan, where my Lorenzo's children ended up, I'm not sure if he went there from New York or not. There's another Lorenzo Andrews family on the opposite side of the state that other people keep linking to. But the dates are wrong, the spouse is wrong, the children are wrong. So I finally just did some research on that Lorenzo Andrews so that I was 100% definitively sure that my Lorenzo didn't, skip out on his wife and kids and go start another family. And so that's why I've got a wrong Lorenzo Andrews family tree. Now, there are a couple of different ways that you can look at a pedigree. And when I am doing research on my direct relatives, I prefer this landscape mode because it keeps it just to the direct relatives. My siblings are not listed. The 10 or 12 children that Russell and his wife had are not listed, just the direct line. You can also do, and there are times you're going to want to be in to this more portrait mode, more up and down mode, in order to see, double check some relationships or see what's going on with a certain part of the family. And so here I am, here are my parents. So this leads, here are my grandparents, siblings of both parents, grandparents. Here's my dad's side, my grandparents. So there's lots of information here, but sometimes it's actually more information than you need. And you can get to the siblings through, when you're searching through the other format. So I am lucky that I have a great example of all the things that can go right and all the things that can go sideways in doing research, and it's my dad's dad. So let's take a look real quick at what happens when you've done some research and put together your tree. I'm going to click on Ernest's profile. And this is all information that in my searching on Ancestry, this is all information that I ran across, decided that it was him. It was actually Ernest that I was looking at, and saved to Ernest's page. And we've got here a chronological list of facts. If you're doing things by hand, putting things in a timeline can really help point out what you might be missing and whether some things make sense. If someone is shown as having a child when they were 9 years old, most of the time that's going to be completely incorrect, for example. Or if the child's age is older than the parent's age, you've got something going wrong. In this column, we've got the sources. So when I click on something, it will lead me to the sources that make me think that Ernest's birthday was, in fact, the 9th of October, 1887. And And so if there was something I wanted to edit about that, I could do it here. There are other places I could edit it. I have a variety of gallery images of photos related to Ernest, and those are all kept in one place. Ernest served in World War I, and so there's lots of information related to his service. And then if Ancestry has a hint for me, that's what those little green leaves were when we were looking at the tree itself. And I can click on the hint and look at that further. I know because I double checked yesterday, these hints are not from any particular document. They're other people on Ancestry who have Ernest in their tree. And one of them is a fourth cousin who has correct information. The other ones are folks who Ernest is someone peripheral to them. And so lots of times the information that they've saved I know is wrong. And so I would go in and choose to ignore those, but I always double check when I get a hint because there might have been a new document freshly digitized that has something for Ernest. So let me hop in real quick. I was saying that census records are one of the things that are super useful when you're trying to track down information. And again, by 1930, we were collecting a lot of data as opposed to the very first census in 1790, which was the name of the head of the household and then a little chart that showed how many people of what age and what sex were in that family. One of the reasons that the census got more and more detailed is because it was one of the organizations, even though it didn't function to collect data in between each census back at this point, it was one of the only organizations that was set up to collect data. And so other parts of the government would contract with the census to collect information about economics, about health, about a variety of things, because the census had people in place every 10 years to go do this. So the first thing I'm getting is a quick overview of the information. And this, when you're just starting, you might get several different people with the same name as the relative you're trying to take a quick look at or do the research on. And so it can be really handy to stop first at this point. And if the birth year, for example, is wildly different, maybe the birthplace doesn't make any sense. There might be something that stands out that makes it immediately obvious this is not your relative, but almost always you're still going to go on and view the image. One of the reasons you're going to view it is that the computer algorithms and the people who do the transcribing sometimes get things wrong. And so they might mix up, instead of 1897, they write 1879. I'll show you in the 1940 census, there's a couple of sort of completely fascinating mistakes in the transcription on Ernest that would make you walk right by it if you weren't going in to look at the document itself. So in 1930, like I say, we were collecting lots of information. So here we are in Michigan, all across the country, the same form was used. So it's got the state, the county. If it's an incorporated place, West Branch was a city. If it was unincorporated, then it would probably be the rural town or the post office location or the township that was listed. And we can see who this was taken on April 4th of 1930 by Fred Powers, who was the enumerator. This information here about what district they were in, that district often changed between each census. But that can be helpful information when you're trying to look something up. Also, the sheet number that they're on can be helpful information. One of the nice things about Ancestry, you can see here when I've gone past the column with the names in it, And then Ancestry pops that up so that I can see, I can make sure I'm following the right lines. The same thing happens when I go beyond the title of the column at the top. It gives me information about what that column is about. So let's get down here to Ernest. And so here we go. We've got Ernest, Frida, my grandma, and Uncle Max, who was 7 at that time. Ernest was born in Michigan. His father and mother were born in Michigan. My grandma emigrated from Nova Scotia, so she was born in Canada. Her parents were born in Canada. Sometimes this information right here can be, your first break in figuring out where someone came from. And we can see as we look along for Ernest that he was working as a mail clerk at the post office. He was a wage worker as opposed to an owner. This column was he a veteran? WW stands for the World War, because at this point in 1930, there had not been a second World War. So if someone was a veteran of, by 1930, I don't know how many Civil War veterans there were, but the Spanish-American War, there's some other wars out there that happened besides the World War. But that was some information that the government wanted at that time. You can learn some things like my grandma immigrated in 1920, and NA means she was naturalized. I assume she was naturalized, but I don't have those documents yet. There are ways I can get them, just haven't gotten to it yet. So I've got lots of information on here. Even in the census years when by 1850, when they were listing all the members of the household, they didn't necessarily list the relationship to the head of household. And so sometimes you're looking at things and wondering, why might that person have been in the household? Sometimes you can tell if it lists the occupation and they're listed as a servant or a farm laborer. I'm just going up to try to see. Yeah, sometimes you'll run across things like there might be someone who is old enough to be an adult child, but they're actually the daughter-in-law, for example, and the child that's listed might be a grandchild. And also with Ancestry, anytime you stop on a block, it'll tell you what they believe that block says. So if you're looking at something and you're not sure, they think that's Oka B. Millard. And in looking at it, yeah, it looks like Millard. Another nice thing here is it tells you what street they're on. In this one, the house numbers did not get recorded. I think in 1940 it did get recorded. So, there's just a ton of information here. If you have not known this information about your family. Now let me pop into the 1940 census. You see here it lists Ernesto Andrews. Now I'm living in California now, so seeing the name Ernesto doesn't surprise me, but I know that was not his first name. And you can see there's a few other changes. Family members listed. Who's Maxine? There is not a Maxine in the household. And then, boop, there's my dad. So let's go in and look at the image, and it'll become obvious pretty quick. In this case, in 1940, this circle with an X indicates that who they got the information from. So in some cases, it's the head of the household. Depending on the time of day and day of the week, it might have been the wife that gave it. But in this circumstance, it was Ernest himself. And you can see that Ernest Oliver Andrews, that O is written close enough that the person transcribing it thought it was Ernesto. Now this is just sort of fascinating to me. We've got Maxine, so I'm guessing the person misheard Maxon, but even though that's a name typically associated with a woman, they got the sex right. He's listed as his son. And that's double reinforced by the F for female, M for male. So, if you gave a quick glance at the details of this outside of the document itself, especially if you haven't had enough experience to see that things get a little crazy in transcription, and it's almost always, if there's any possibility it's the right person, go look at it. This would be one that you could have dismissed because there's an Ernesto and a Maxine, and that doesn't make sense. And again, one of the things they asked that year, the Great Depression was on in the 1930s. By the 1940s, they wanted to know if people had been in the same place in 1935. It was sort of a barometer the Census Bureau was using to see how much moving around was going on between the 1930 and the 1940 census. Some of the categories, private work versus public work versus seeking work, how many hours were worked in a week. Here's someone, George Souse, who worked 60 hours in a week. He was the owner of something, so that's no surprise. A restaurant, of course. No surprise there. And, Ernest's income was $2,100, and he had a pretty good job as a post office clerk. It really kind of helps set the context of how monetary values have changed over time. So that gives you a quick look at a couple of census figures, census examples. There we go. There's some interesting things I've been able to find. Ernest served in Russia at the very end of World War I, where if you've never heard of the polar bears or the fighting that went on after World War I officially ended, but where U.S. troops were quietly being kept fighting after the war ended, then there's lots of documentation out there. There's actually a memorial at a cemetery in Michigan to Detroit's own polar bears. When he first got there, Ernest, I was able to find an article. He was writing letters home, and so there was an article in a paper about his time in Archangel. He was wounded there during the winter, couldn't be evacuated because the port was frozen, of course, that far north. So he came home in the spring once the ice had left, and I was able to find, this is a picture of the ship that he came home from England on, from Archangel to England, and then another ship from England to the east coast of the United States. So there we go. I found the military list that had him as one of the passengers on the ship, and it gave the name of the ship, and so I was able to research that, and it was the Louisville. And I have to say that ship does not look very big to me to be crossing the ocean, but there it is. He would have spent time there. So those are some of the kinds of things that you end up with at Ancestry. Now let me pop into Family Search, and again, because I have an account, this is a slightly different landing page than what you would get to if you needed to set up an account. Similar items along this ribbon right here. Let me go to the family tree. So it has a bit of a different look, and whatever site you use, please know that it takes a little time. I've seen some people get really frustrated trying, when they're in the middle of the learning curve of how a particular site works. So especially when you are starting and are learning, you know, Family Search has lots of videos about how to use the site. Ancestry has lots of videos about how to use the site. So take a little bit of time and get yourself acquainted with how the site works, what the different emblems and symbols mean. Now here's Ernest again. So let me pull him up. And you can see the layout is a little bit different, but a lot of the same information is there. You know, information about his birth. We've got the if I click on sources, then we'll see that the census, the 1930 census, the 1940 census is available. There was a census of World War I vets that was done, you know, that had some information about them. So there, you know, sometimes you come across different things when you're searching at different sites. So that's another reason to, you know, do some searching at more than one site. You know, Ernest's, I have his draft registration card at both places, but here's some information about him. You know, I can click on the actual card. One of the nice thing about looking at original documents is there are often documents where you are looking at, now this is a transcription of it because it's typed. The original is in, which I have access to in Ancestry, is in his handwriting. But it's all the information. You know, he was in auto repair business with another guy at 260 Trumbull Ave in Detroit. I found out he had one finger where he had lost the first joint. Now I know that he worked in lumber camps for a while when he was a young adult, and I'm willing to bet that that's where I mean, he could have lost it just plain farming, but it did not stop him joining the Army. But there are not always anything listed. It's less usual in my experience to find something listed on the draft card that's an actual impediment. So, but you can do, you know, you can do lots of the same things. There are some ways that Family Search organizes the information. There are some things that they seem to have easy access to that are I have a little bit harder time finding similar things on Ancestry, but you know, that gives you just a quick look at the two different biggest sites that folks use. All right, let me hop into chat for a second and see. Yeah, sometimes when I get an address for something, I will go into Google and I will search the address. Sometimes it comes up as an empty lot. Sometimes it comes up with a house on it that is clearly not of the time period that I'm looking at. Often street names have changed, and I'm not, you know, if I'm just looking for my own amusement, there are sites I can go to that will tell me the changed names of the streets. But a lot of time Google already knows that and will take me to a street of a different name that if I look at it turns out to be the same street. So did I merge Family Search and Ancestry trees or manually input on each? Yeah, it was, well, so it's manual in the sense that I'm doing the search and then clicking on things, yes, please save this. But the two don't talk to each other. The codes with letters and numbers on Family Search, these are the numbers that the church uses to keep track of each distinct individual. And so if you are doing your research as part of your duty as a member of the Mormon Church, these numbers make a difference. If you are not part of the Mormon Church, they they can help you double check that the person you're looking at is the right person, but they are not otherwise relevant. Yes, with census, that's a good point, Cathy. One of the things that I always do when I first find someone on the census page is I go through the 2 pages before and the 2 pages after. And I try to look and see if I find any other relatives or any other family names or any other neighbors or associates that I know have been part of the family's extended support network for a long time. And so, sometimes I'm researching one relative and I find them, and when I don't look further, I might be researching a different relative, maybe even from a different line, and land on a same year, same, general area census, and going forward or back, especially because most of my relatives were on farms in small rural communities. So the whole township might just have 4, 5, 6 pages, as opposed to New York City, where you could be close to a relative and it could be 10 pages before. But yes, always take a look at the whole page they're on, and then take a look, at least 1 page before and 1 page after. I recommend 2. It's amazing the things you find. You also get a sense of, on the census that has valuations for real estate, personal property, those sorts of things, you start to get a sense of roughly where they fall economically compared to their neighbors. The other thing that's really handy about reading more census pages is that it really develops your ability to decipher old handwriting the more you look. And in fact, when I was looking and I found Lorenzo Dow Andrews, who's my brick wall, the way the L was written was so odd looking that I really needed to be sure that was the word Lorenzo. And I just kept going through this particular guy's pages until I found another name starting with the letter L. It was a Lewis, so it was really obvious that it was an L. And yes, it was the same style as my Lorenzo's L. So that gave me more confidence that in fact I had the right page. Okay, now I want to hop into a site. There are tons and tons of places that have great forms. There are tons and tons of places that have, tutorials and other kinds of things. I like to mention the Midwest Genealogy Center because overall I like the nature of their forms and they have lots and lots of resources. They're located in St. Louis, so close to the actual middle of the country. And one thing I look for when I'm looking at forms, the more I know about, like I do all of my work online, when I get to something confusing, that's when I tend to get out the paper and the pencil and start doing the family unit charts, to try to sort out what's going on. Let me just scroll down a little bit. Here's family history forms that they have. You can also get blank census forms. So if you want to transcribe the census information, each of these census forms has all the same columns as the census year that you're looking at. And that can be very handy, especially if you've got a large family that you're trying to, and you want to transcribe the actual data for whatever reason. So they have a couple of different pedigree charts and then a family unit chart that I'm going to show you examples of. And I just popped some information in real quick. This is one that is fillable online, and then you can print it up or save it. And I just, started with myself in number 1. The convention is that the husband, the father goes first, the wife goes second. You can do it differently if you want, but just, on here, obviously they had labeled it. But just keep track. If you choose to do it a different way, make sure that you've got it labeled, because if you want to share it with other folks, it may prove confusing for them. So, and really, I should have put my name in the date. I think today's the 8th. Let me mention, for numbers 1 through 9, you can either just put the number like 8, or you can put 08. Either way, if you do both digits, then people can be more sure that there's not an error, and it's actually 8 instead of 18. But again, depending on who you're doing it for, what month is this? June. And of course, always all 4 numbers of the year. So here's how it gets filled out. B for birth, W for where, D for death, W for where, marriage, and where. Now my mom, of course, would go right here. Let me just pop her in real quick. You see, for her, it's just listed birth and death. It's because we've already got marriage up here. And with these pedigree charts, you can see that the further back you go, the less room there is for information. So genealogists all the time are finding as much space saving as they can do. Let me take a real quick look with you at a family unit chart. And again, here is Ernest and Frida. She went by Frida. And I just got started on this. So here's Uncle Max. There are one of my favorite family unit charts is one that's actually landscape oriented, and you got to write in really tiny letters, but it has a powerful amount of information in it. I also, last thing before we go back to questions, I want to make sure, especially if you're getting started, that you know about Roots Tech Connect from this year. Roots Tech Connect is one of the largest conventions for around genealogy. It's not the only one, but it's really big. It typically happens each year in February in Utah. This year, because of the pandemic, not only did it go completely virtual, but it went completely free. And the wonderful thing about it is that all the sessions, which were pre-recorded, are available until the next convention. And so even if you don't use Family Search, if you make because it's the Family Search folks, okay, that are doing this. If you make a Family Search account, then you can put together a playlist, things that you want to see. And since when I printed up the list of classes, it was like 19 pages single spaced. So making a playlist from the vast lists of information is really worth it, so you can find what you want to see. If you have not done much, or if there is something that you're interested in that you haven't started before, they have some curated lists. Here we go, getting started. Each of these is a series about getting started. And if you click on see more, there will be more other ones available. If you want to know about Family Search, they have curated a set. If you want to know about Ancestry or MyHeritage, if you want to know about DNA and genealogy. And so I really urge you, if you are brand new, if you are think you know a lot already but want to know more, I really urge you to take advantage of this terrific resource while it's available this year. So yeah, church records can be a little hit or miss depending on whether the church is essentially still existing. If it was a standalone congregation, not part of a larger organization, the United Methodist Church has a variety of records going back. Individual churches that have been there for a while go back. If a different church bought the building, then the other church's records are unlikely to be with the new owners, but it's hard to say where the old records are. They may have been kept, they may not, depending on the congregation that they may have been part of. All right. I also I want to make sure you know that we've got a couple of upcoming classes. Obviously, we had the genealogy, the getting started class tonight on July 14th. There'll be It's All Relative, which is helping sort out cousins, second cousins, half cousins, once removed, 5 times removed, etc. And then on Thursday, August 19th, we're going to do Deciphering Old Writing, which is a lot of fun. But when you're back looking at all those old documents, it can be really helpful to learn a few of the basics about deciphering old writing. So, and you can find those if you go to the Salinas Public Library website and check on our calendar by those dates. Then you'll be able to find and register for those. All right. Has anybody, if you want to unmute and ask a question, go ahead. I'll stick around for a few more minutes. But I really appreciate all of you joining us tonight. Thank you very much.
Cathy, I actually had a question.
Sure.
Oh, I forgot to raise my hand. My question is, for each presentation that you give online, do we have to register each time, or can we just stay in the loop?
Each is a separate registration. So yeah, because not everybody's coming to all the classes. So pick and choose which one you would like. And I'll also put in.
And then would the meeting ID and password be the same, or would that be different each time also?
It'll be different each time.
Okay,
yep.
Thank you.
And I'm gonna add my email address. You're welcome to reach out to me if you can't find it or have other questions.
Okay, thank you.
Who else has a question for me?
Yeah, Joe. This is Joe. I enjoyed your presentation. I have a question about my heritage. Like, I've done Ancestry, My Heritage, and 23andMe, but My Heritage keeps sending me information, like hints about like in-laws, like my uncle by marriage, his family. Like, why would I be interested in that?
That's a really good question. One of the reasons that you would be interested, and you get to decide how far out of your direct line you go, but keep in mind that if those folks were related to each other or saw each other regularly, or were good friends, or maybe they only saw each other occasionally, sometimes you can find information about the people you're most interested in from the people that surround them.
Oh.
So,
but in my case, like my grandparents all came from England, and this uncle that they're sending me information, he was the only one of his family who came to Canada from Ireland. So I can't really see why I would be interested in that.
Well, I just, you get to decide where you want to direct your energy, but I encourage you to just add him to the tree and take a look at some of the people related to him. Sometimes you're just finding out more information about that time period, and it can help you better understand what's going on for the people of that same generation. Other times it's a dead end that you're just not interested in. So you get to decide how much research you want to do and where you want to focus it.
Okay, thank you very much.
You bet.
Is there any way to find even recent or old obituaries from Italy?
There are some ways to track down international resources. If okay. You're using Ancestry and you pay for the level that lets you have access to international things, you could probably check their information. You can go to their collections, go to obituaries, and you can sort it by geographic origin. for example. So that would be a thing you could do. You could probably do that as well. I'm not sure what Family Search's Italy collection is like, but they may very well have lots of information. Another thing you can do is look for Italian genealogy research groups.
Okay.
You know, that people who are of Italian extraction, and even on Facebook all the time, there are, you name the location, the time period, etc. There's probably a Facebook page where people are exchanging ideas and resources about it. So I'd encourage you to check that. The last thing is go to YouTube. There are some excellent genealogy resources. I don't know if Lisa Louise Cook has done a program on Italian genealogy resources, but it wouldn't surprise me, as one example of a YouTube site. But just in search, just put in genealogy Italian obituaries and see what comes up.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure. Anyone else with a question?
I actually had another question, Cathy.
Okay.
I noticed when you were sharing your screen, it had to do with Ancestry, and you showed some of those pedigree charts, or no, before that, the timeline. How much does Ancestry.com populate information, or do you actually physically have to put in your info, your data?
Oh no, as soon as I click on something to save, it does all the populating.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, and I look forward to the July.
Very good.
I'm getting back to genealogy, so this is wonderful.
Yeah.
Thanks.
If you have any trouble getting in, finding the way to register, just let me know. But it should be pretty straightforward.
Okay, thanks for putting it in the chat, your contact information.
Yep,
Thank you
no
so
problem. All right, folks, thank you very much. I'm gonna go give the dogs their treats and have a snack or something. So thank you. I love being able to do these programs. We appreciate you attending.